Zoom, and we're there, and we're there. All right, I got them all down pat. On Thursday, August 8th, 2024 at 12:16 p.m. Eastern Time with Mr. Murray Sabrin. He was just showing me over, I should say Dr. Sabrin, excuse me, over your shoulder, all of your books. I've read Why the Fed Sucks, but I think the links to all of your books are in the description. And the one I do need to grab is your memoir. But you at 75 years and 2 days, it has been the length of your journey to America. So well, I post the live link. Dr. Sabrin, could you please introduce yourself? If you want to jump on the 75 years, 2 days anniversary, you can, or we can jump straight into the market crash.
Oh, thanks, Tommy. It's great to be with you again. Yeah, August 6th, 1949, I came to America with my parents and older brother. My parents were the only ones in their respective families to survive the Holocaust in their native Poland. My father was a partisan commander, and his part of Poland was liberated by the Soviet Army in July of 1944. So effectively, the war was over for him. And a few years before he passed away, he wrote his memoir called "We Dare to Live," which is available on Amazon, and it describes his journey during World War II, how he survived to fend off the Nazis, how he was captured, put in a prison work camp, and escaped right before the Germans killed everyone in the camp. So that's a hair-raising story, to say the least. And so when we arrived in America, well, let me just back up. My father's first cousin came to America a few years before we did. My father had a great aunt who lived in New York City, who raised his mother when she came to America around the turn of the century, when she was an infant. And so then she went back to Poland, got married, and raised a family. My father was the oldest, I think, of six children. So we wrote them and we got the papers to come to America in August of 1949. So we came through the front door, sailed up the New York Harbor, past the Statue of Liberty. And that's why I have the Statue of Liberty, my first book, Tax-Free 2000, The Rebirth of American Liberty, and my memoir, because liberty is the foundation of America, not democracy, not entitlement. And so that journey began as a youngster, trying to figure out what happened during World War II, asking my parents about their family, what happened during World War II. And so I started reading about the Holocaust, and not by no means an expert about it, but I became curious about why we have these incredible conflicts between nations. And so over time, and becoming an academic, began my academic career at Ramapo College in 1985. Previously, I had done some work in New York City public schools as a school teacher, then worked as an investment analyst, staff economist for one of the oldest economic research organizations in the country, worked in commercial real estate. So I have an eclectic background in teaching, in investments, in real estate, and had a 35-year career at Ramapo College teaching finance, corporate finance, securities investments, and my favorite course, financial history of the United States, which to me is one of the most important courses you can take, because you really get to understand how the country evolved economically, financially, politically, socially, culturally. And the students love the course because they received information that they otherwise would not have had in any of their history or economics courses. So the students really got, I think, a good education about America and what America is all about, and how the financial system was instrumental in the evolution of America from this backward country in the 1700s to this incredible, dynamic, entrepreneurial oriented country. But unfortunately, Tommy, as we well know, the socialists are on the march. They've been on the march for over 100 years, and now we have probably the most full-fledged socialist uh, candidacy for president and vice president in Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. It's just amazing what they believe in and how many people are gravitating toward what they believe in, which is quite frightening, because socialism is the bane of human existence. It's a destroyer of the spirit. It's a destroyer of economic well-being. It's a destroyer of prosperity. And nothing good comes from socialism, and yet they're giving us socialism in the veneer of freedom. I mean, when Kamala Harris talks about freedom, her freedom is the government giving you more goodies and expanding the size and power and scope of the federal government. And the flip side of that is these endless wars. I came to America, Tommy, in August of 1949. In June of 1950, the first undeclared war since World War II, when we went into Korea. And then in 1965, Johnson announced the big buildup
Hmm.
in Vietnam, another undeclared war that lasted 10 years until we got out in April 1975. And then the two Bush presidents gave us the first Gulf War in 1991, and then the second Gulf War with his son, George W. Bush, in 2003. And now we're involved in two proxy wars in Ukraine and Israel and Gaza. So the military industrial complex, the interventionist foreign policy, has been the bane of the American people because all those dollars have been borrowed to fight these wars. And that's one of the reasons we have a $35 trillion national debt, $2 trillion budget deficits as far as the eye can see. And for your generation, Tommy, and future generations, the debt is going to overwhelm the US economy. And that has incredible implications for the well being of the American people and the health of the economy, because we are going the way of Argentina. Argentina ran massive deficits for decades. They printed money to cover those deficits, and the peso collapsed in value. And they had hyperinflation, which is defined by some people as 50% or more inflation per month, not per year, per month. And we're not anywhere near there, but prices have gone up quite a bit the last 3, 4 years. And that's because during COVID 2020, the Federal Reserve put the foot to the metal and printed trillions of dollars, which was used to prop up the economy because of the lockdowns. And that money has spread through the economy, raising prices and services of goods that we want. And so what we have is the perfect storm of a welfare warfare state run amok. No one in Washington has the backbone to say enough is enough. Let's return America to a republic, to a limited government, where the federal government only spends money authorized under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And that's what I'm promoting in my so-called golden years as a retiree, is through my Substack at murraysabrin.substack.com, in my books that I've written in the last few years. And I'll be involved in a new project called Money Clips that'll be off and running soon, with podcasts and courses to educate as many people as I can about finance, about economics, about healthcare, and I talk about the really destructive foreign policy that we've had under both Republicans and Democrats. And that's what worries me, because we could be on the brink of a major catastrophe in the Middle East if Iran and Hezbollah attacks Israel and we attack them. And then who knows if Russia and China come in. I mean, it's going to be a total disaster if the escalation is not put down, and we have peace negotiations in order to have real, genuine peace. And I said this on a podcast the other day, Tommy. The only solution, I think, that will give us genuine peace in Israel and the Palestinians is if the Palestinians become incorporated in Israel's society and have democracy that Israel supposedly has, that will incorporate the 2 million or so Palestinians. And you have this democracy where all people work together, Jews, Christians, Muslims, non-believers, whatever. And that's the way I envision it. I think a two-state solution is out. First of all, Netanyahu doesn't want it. And I think it's just incompatible with the geography and the politics of it. But we'll see if cooler heads prevail and there can be some peace in the Mideast, because when it comes to war, Tommy, there are no winners. There are really no winners when it comes to war. It's destructive on all sides. In fact, the day we arrived in America was an anniversary of the first atomic bomb on Japan in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945.
Hmm.
And then I think it was 2 years later, it was in Nagasaki, or 3 days later. So the United States began the nuclear age with the two atomic bombs, and then the Soviet Union got the nuclear weapons, and then England, France, and other countries. Now, India, Pakistan, Israel, we know has nuclear weapons, which of course they don't admit. And if nuclear weapons are bad, then no one should have nuclear weapons. If Iran is trying to develop one because they see this as a counterpoint to Israel's nuclear weapons, then let's have a major peace conference and say the world cannot have nuclear weapons in so many hands because, God forbid, someone starts firing a nuclear weapon, then it could be the end of civilization as we know it. And that's why I think peace the, nuclear disarmament, I think, is a worthy goal to have. And we need a military to protect our borders, which of course we don't have. You just see what's going on in the borders. We came through the front door with papers that my father and my mother got from their relatives in the States. And we sailed across the Atlantic Ocean on a ship for about a week or so, came up New York Harbor, landed on the west side of Manhattan, and started to build a life in America with my father having $150 in his pocket. So this is the American way. This is the way immigrants have come to America from all over the world is do it the right way. As my father used to say, there's a right way and a wrong way. Always choose the right way. And unfortunately, the politicians seem to choose the wrong way of what they think America should be all about. And America should be all about what's in the Declaration and in the Bill of Rights and in Article 1, Section 8. And that's my message to the American people because we are going so far from the original premise of America, of a limited government, decentralized republic, to this Leviathan that's issuing mandates and coercing people to do what they want us to do. And there's a new book by Justice Gorsuch of the Supreme Court, and he was interviewed in the Wall Street Journal last weekend, Tommy, and he said we have too many laws in this country. All these cases that come to before the Supreme Court never should be there because we have so many laws that entrap people because the government can really indict anybody for a violation of some law that's on the books that they didn't even know they're in violation of. So it just shows you that we have too many laws, too many regulations. We have a tax code that is inexplicable. It takes hours and hours to just fill out a tax form. And that's why I wrote Tax Free 2000, how we could have a tax-free America and have more prosperity, more peace, and not worry about trying to make sure that we are compliant with a tax code that is just impossible to understand, that takes hours and hours to put together. And my mission is very simple, is to bring these ideas to the American people, as others have done through the Mises Institute, the Future of Freedom Foundation, the Foundation for Economic Education, and other free market organizations, because they are doing important work to show that what's happening to America is not sustainable. And that's the key word. It's not sustainable. It's counterproductive, and it violates all the rights we supposedly have that are articulated in the Bill of Rights. And there's a poll that recently came out, Tommy, that really should worry everybody. I think it said 62% of the American people say we have too much free speech in America. If that isn't an eye opener of where people are philosophically and psychologically in this country, there's no such thing as too much free speech. You either have free speech or you don't. It's a binary phenomenon. And what we're seeing on college campuses, shouting down speakers, disinviting people, this is an example of big government run amok. And unfortunately, people are buying into this agenda, which I find very troubling because what will happen eventually, we could wind up one day and the government issues mandates through executive order, and we lose most of our freedoms to travel, to what we eat, what we drink, what we read, and our medical freedom, Tommy. This is why COVID was an interesting experiment and test. The American people, for the most part, complied with all the mandates, the shots, the stay-at-home orders, and there were very few people that stood up and say enough is enough. And so we'll see what happens in the next few years. But in the meantime, we have an election coming up, and I'm not too confident that whatever the outcome will be, that America will remain a free country, or at least a quasi-free country.
One thing we've or you've talked about on my show before is kind of the cycles of economic downturns and crises.
Yeah.
In the wake of really whatever's happened in the last week or so. I think primarily Monday or Tuesday, where several trillion dollars were wiped out from the stock market.
Yeah.
Does that fit into the kind of the pattern you've talked about before on here?
Yeah, I mean, we live in a economic cyclical world because the Federal Reserve, and prior to that, the banks during the 19th century were printing money, and you had bank panics throughout the 19th century. And the last bank panic we had was 1907, which led to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. And the Federal Reserve was established in order to what? Stabilize the business cycle, preserve the purchasing power of the dollar, and to be a lender of last resort for the banks, which we know are have a flawed business model. What do banks do? They take money in deposits and they lend out money long term. And so that's a flawed business model. And that's why you've had bank runs throughout American history until FDR gave us FDIC. And so there are no more bank runs per se, except that the banks are highly speculative institutions because as long as they have the support of the government, they can engage in risky lending and in risky investments. So having said that, the Federal Reserve does something that we all wish we had. They have an unlimited checking account. They also manipulate interest rates, the interest rates that banks borrow amongst each other called the Fed funds rate. It has nothing to do with the Federal Reserve, but that's what it's called, the Fed funds rate. Banks borrow amongst each other, and the Federal Reserve affects that by pumping money into the economy, reserves into the banking system, and taking reserves out of the system, depending upon where they think that rate should be. Now, long-term rates are determined by supply and demand, as all goods and services and interest rates should be determined by supply and demand. That's a simple concept everyone can understand. Even the Democratic candidates for president and vice president should be able to understand that. So what the Fed does is pump money in, thinking that this is going to, quote, stimulate the economy because they now have a new mandate, keeping inflation low, which in their case, which in their mind is 2% inflation. Where that number comes from, I don't know, but the reality is in a free market economy, Tommy, prices slowly go down as we've seen over my lifetime when it comes to televisions and computers and other high-tech items where prices go down. That's the beauty of a free market economy. As productivity increases, as more supply comes onto the marketplace, prices will steadily go down. A computer that I bought in the mid 80s for $2,000, you can't even get that today because it has such little storage of memory. Today, you can get for $2,000, you can get a fabulous computer, which is like 10,000 times more powerful than the one I bought in 1984, 85. So it just shows you the power of technology, the power of productivity. So why do we have these recurring cycles? Well, as I posted in my Substack, the Federal Reserve pumps money in. It gives us an economic high, speculation in real estate, stocks, other assets. And then inflation starts to kick in, prices start to kick in, wages start to increase. And then the Fed gets worried because public opinion says, hey, I'm paying too much, my salary's not going up enough. There's an inflation problem. That's what's happened in the last 2, 3 years. And so the Fed cuts back on the amount of reserves in the banking system. So there's less money to lend, and rates go up, housing slows down, automobile sales slow down, and prices may not go down, but they don't go up as fast as they did during the economic boomlet that the Fed caused. So we go through these periodic ups and downs, and eventually something has to give. Like in 1929, the whole system came crashing down when the stock market was down nearly 90% in 3, 4 years because there was so much speculation in the 1920s because the Federal Reserve was pumping money into the banking system, even though prices were flat because of the great productivity of the 1920s. And so to some degree, we have that today because companies, entrepreneurs are being very creative in getting goods and services that we want in a very efficient manner. But when you pump so much money in, the stock market gets a high. And that's what we've seen since 2008, 2009, when the market bottomed out. And then the market bottomed out during COVID in March of 2020, when the market went down 35% in like 6 weeks. And then the Fed came in, pumped money in, and the stock market took off as the economy recovered from the lockdowns. So these cycles are occurring, and that's why I wrote Navigating the Boom Bust Cycle. So you can see that's right there. You can see it just next to my ear. There it is, Navigating the Boom Bust Cycle. And that book explains how the cycle occurs, what businesses are affected by the cheap money policies. And the Fed really tries to thread a needle. They try to figure out what interest rate on the short-term money that people borrow will give us the best economic outcome. Well, my advice to the Fed, don't try to do that because that's called central planning and it doesn't work. All you need to do is get out of the way and let markets determine the interest rate, not what you do by pumping money in and pumping money out of the banking system. So that is something that is not embraced by most economists and certainly not Federal Reserve officials and certainly not people in Congress. And even presidential candidates think that the Fed is necessary. Well, the Fed is not necessary. That's why your listeners, Tommy, can get Murray Rothbard's classic monograph, What Has Government Done to Our Money? That was published more than 60 years ago for free. Just go to Mises.org, Mises.org, and there's on the bottom of the homepage, you can order the most the best book there is on money and banking that explains that we need a free market in money, just as we need a free market in all goods and services. And if we had a free market in money, the people would choose what would money be. And historically, it's been gold and silver uh, working side by side to make people give people the ability to conduct transactions
Yeah.
and save for their future, where the money would not be devalued in purchasing power. I mean, right now the dollar has been going down in value virtually every year since the Federal Reserve was created. I think that the last number I saw was the dollar is worth uh, has lost 95% of its purchasing power. That's not stabilizing the purchasing power of the dollar. So the Fed has failed on that account of its original mission, and it's also failed on its account to iron out the business cycle, which they think is natural. It's not natural. The business cycle is caused by the central bank, in our case, the Federal Reserve, manipulating interest rates. And that's the uh, theme of Murray Rothbard's monograph, What Has Government Done to Our Money? And I can't stress enough how your readers could get it for free. You don't even have to pay for postage. So you get the book and postage free from the Mises Institute because it explains in a very um, direct manner, simple manner, logical manner, how money and banking are part of a free market economy and that we don't need the government intervention in money and banking in order to have prosperity. That is the theme of this wonderful little booklet.
Why, other than I guess macro cycles, why have we seen the last week manifest in the way it has? Is it just a roulette wheel? Is it like general probability, like we were due for a downturn? Is there any one specific? I mean, from the layman like me, I would look at it and go, wars in the Middle East potentially escalating. They tried to blow the president's head off.
Yeah.
In, in general, it seems like things are getting a little spicier. Why is that? Or is it just a macro cycle and it's
Well,
kind
there are several things. First of all, there's a cycle every year throughout the year in the stock market. Usually, the stock market has a weak period up until around October for in midsummer to October. You look at the seasonal factors, and it has to do with the way money flows into the stock market, money flows out of the stock market. But and the stock market was, as analysts would say, was overvalued. In other words, people had bid up stocks since the low last October, and when the market was up, I think, what 30% or something in a year, that is not consistent with the underlying earnings of the companies that make up the stock market. So what happened is the people started to head for the exits, and you get these one-day drops of 1,000 points. And when I before I left before I retired, I told my students I would expect the stock market to have very volatile periods where the stock market go up 1,000, 2,000 points a day, go down 1,000, 2,000 points a day, because it's based upon perception and what they think is going to happen in the short term. In the long term, the stock market will go up because of earnings and easy money. Because when there's more money in the economy, it has to go somewhere. It goes into goods and services, it goes into real estate, it goes into commodities, it goes into collectibles, and sometimes prices come down. So this is part of the phenomenon of having a central bank pumping money in, pumping money out. But if you're a long-term investor, young people should just take their part of their income, put in a 401k or an IRA, and for 40, 50 years, that money will compound and they'll have a lot more money than they possibly could think of because historically the stock market's gone up about 9, 10% a year. I'm talking about the S&P 500 index. So if you look at that index and your money's compounding 9, 10% a year, that over 50 years will give you a lot of net worth by the time you retire.
So then if you look at something like, I don't know, like Nvidia or Warren Buffett dumping 277, I think, $billion, or dumping that much Apple stock and getting that much cash,
Yeah.
is this a case of self-fulfilling prophecies?
Well, in Buffett's case, I mean, Apple made up a huge portion of Berkshire's portfolio, and he sold half of his Apple, or he sold half of Berkshire's stake, and now he has nearly $300 billion in cash. So he feels that the stock market is overvalued, and particularly Apple stock, since he sold so much of it. And he will wait until the stock market reaches a level where he thinks it's a good bargain. He wrote an op-ed in September, October, I think, of 2008, saying he's a buyer of U.S. stocks because he thinks the market has come down quite a bit because of the housing bubble crash. Well, the market didn't bottom out till March of 2009. That was the bottom of that cycle. So he was a little bit early, but he's not trying to time the market. He's just trying to find what are good values that will have long-term prospects. So by selling a Berkshire Apple stock, he raised a lot of cash. He has the most cash that Berkshire's ever had in its portfolio. I mean, it's roughly about 25% or more of Berkshire's net worth is in cash, which is what Treasury bills. Every week, the cash flow that Berkshire has from all the companies that are owned by Berkshire, they go and buy Treasury bills. So they're sitting probably with $200 billion or more in Treasury bills, earning 5%. So that's $10 billion a year right there in income. So that's a pretty good deal, rather than trying to figure out how much my stock portfolio will go down. And he sold some other stocks as well. I think he sold some Bank of America stock that he's owned for quite a while. He bought that up, bought the Bank of America stock during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So he's always looking to do things that will increase the net worth of shareholders. And since he's one of the largest shareholders, he's I think going to be 94 this year. He's still running the company.
94.
He's looking to he's brought on people who will continue the mission of Berkshire when he's gone. And I think he said that when he's gone, that Berkshire stock should be sold and invested in the S&P 500 index. So that's kind of interesting that he doesn't want his estate to hold on to Berkshire stock, but just use it for an index fund. And in addition, all his net worth will be going to charities, to foundations. So his estate won't be paying any income tax on his estate. So that's kind of fascinating as well, since he thinks he's under taxed, but he's not using any of his net worth to enrich the U.S. Treasury. He's using it for philanthropic purposes.
I mean, if you're that good with money and you understand it that well, yeah, I would imagine that you'd avoid enriching the government at all costs. That's kind of cool though. I like that. I like that he's not leaving it to his legacy. There's something cool about that. Just like, yeah, no, my wins are not your wins. Like, there's something kind of cool about that. Not
Well,
making
the best story about the someone leaving all their estate to charities is a woman who worked for the IRS back in the 1940s. I don't remember her name, but this was a story that came out years and years ago. And she didn't get a promotion because she felt she was being discriminated against because she was a woman. And she was looking over tax returns in her job, and she saw all the stocks that people were buying and holding on to, high quality stocks. So she started buying these high quality stocks, and she amassed a pretty formidable portfolio of stocks. And when she died, she left it to, I think, a university instead of the IRS taxing it when she died. So So by getting snubbed by the IRS for a promotion, she had her revenge by not having the IRS get any of her estate when she died and left it to charity.
To kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier, is it more than just symbolic that as every other, I guess, measurable marker of the economy went down, Lockheed Martin went up? Is that it kind of seems like, and I think it's something that we've all suspected for a while, there is no paying back the debt. It's gonna be ironed out through a massive war. Like we're not paying it off. No, I don't think anyone holds that belief. Is it just kind of is it a matter of time? Is it, we're kind of the amount of interest we're paying every year, it's hitting the hockey stick part of the
Yeah,
exponential
yeah.
curve? Or do you think we're just going to global war and we're just going to wipe it out?
No, no. What is so fascinating, Tommy, is when Reagan was elected in 1980, the national debt, I believe, was $1 trillion, something like that.
How much?
I think it was $1 trillion, the national debt. I think, if I'm not mistaken, and every administration, Republican and Democrat, has increased the national debt. And in the last 8 years, under Trump and Biden, the debt has gone up about $15 trillion. It's enormous how much debt the U.S. Treasury has issued in order to prop up the welfare warfare state. Now, if you look at history of what happened to countries that have gone through periods of massive increase in debt, they don't default on the debt typically. They just print so much money that the debt becomes worth less and less and less. That's what happened in Germany in the early 1920s because they had so much debt from World War One, and they didn't have enough taxes to revenue to cover the expenses of the German government, that they just printed up money to cover the expenses, and the German mark went from four to a dollar in 1914, 4.2 in 1914 to 4.2 trillion in 1923. So there was a total collapse of the German economy and eventually led to the rise of Hitler 10 years later when he took power. So there are lessons in history. In China after World War II, they printed up money and the communists took over in 1949, October of 1949, 2 months after I came to America. The communists took over China because the Shanghai Shek regime printed so much money. Where we're headed is a very dangerous place. It's where we have massive expenditures for the interest on the debt, which is now, I think, the almost the largest expenditure of the federal budget, when at one time it was one of the lowest expenditures of the federal budget because interest rates have risen and so much debt has been taken on. We're spending around $1 trillion a year on interest expense just to service the debt. What that means is the federal government is sucking up resources that could be going into the private sector for capital investment that would increase productivity, that would give us cheaper goods over the long term. And so we're headed to a place where we're going to have economic stagnation if we don't get our financial house in order. Now, no one's proposing, from what I hear, to reduce the debt. Trump made some statements recently that he thinks he can pay off some of the debt, but he didn't do that in his first term. In the first 4 years he was president. Um, so I don't expect if he gets elected that the debt will go down because they're just unwilling to cut spending, military spending and social welfare spending. So what does that mean? That means the debt's going to continue to go up because they're certainly not going to raise enough taxes to pay for the deficit. So we're going to have these perpetual deficits as far as the eye can see. And there are projections that the $35 trillion debt will be $50 trillion by 2040, 2045. It doesn't matter. But imagine $50 trillion of debt at 5% interest expense is $2.5 trillion a year just in servicing the debt, in addition to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the military, and all the other programs of the federal government. So we are headed for a huge financial storm. And war will just aggravate the situation because we're never going to pay for all the military expenditures, so the debt will just keep on piling up. Remember, every dollar that's given to Ukraine or given to Israel to pay for their conflicts has to be borrowed. So the American people are saddled not only with the expense of the military expenditures, but the interest on that expense because that all those dollars have to be borrowed. So we are going to be a financial basket case somewhere down the road. And the evidence will be, Tommy, that when foreigners decide no longer to buy our debt or start cashing in their debt because they don't want to hold US treasuries anymore, that's when we could have a real financial crisis where the Federal Reserve may do what the German central bank did in the early 1920s and just print up money to cover the deficit. That is a real possibility down the road. It's not going to happen next week or next month or next year. It could happen, I would say, within the next 10 years, maybe even sooner. But that's the road that we've traveled on because there's been no a desire in Washington to reduce spending. In Washington, reducing spending means instead of the budget going up 7%, only goes up 5%. That's what they call a reduction in spending in Washington. No, a reduction in spending means if you're spending 7 trillion, you'll be spending 6.5 trillion the next year or 6 trillion the next year. But so much of the expenditures are sort of locked in because of the major programs of the federal government that I don't see a way out of it unless, as you point out, there is a financial crisis where the government literally has to reduce its expenditures. And I don't see that happening because there will be a lot of pain in doing so because so many people are dependent upon a check from the government, whether it's housing subsidies, education subsidies, food subsidies. I mean, there's corporate welfare as well. So if you're going to cut spending, you start with corporate welfare and just get rid of that and tell companies you work in a free market economy, do the best you can to satisfy consumer needs, and don't rely on taxpayers to subsidize you. And that's the stick. The carrot would be to reduce corporate taxes so they have the means and reduce regulations so that they don't have to be burdened by doing things that are unproductive, that don't add anything to creativity, to innovation in a corporation. So the solution, I think, is fairly straightforward. Decentralize political decision making, stop printing money, stop manipulating interest rates, and get the government out of areas that they have no right being in according to the Constitution, and really having a free market, free enterprise economy, which is the best engine for prosperity and reducing poverty. Too many people in Washington just believe the opposite, that we need more government spending to eliminate poverty, when of course it doesn't do so because we've spent trillions and trillions of dollars since the Great Society of the 1960s, and the poverty levels in some communities are still at levels that are just embarrassing given how much wealth there is in this country.
I think in more ways than one, we probably do mirror 1920s Germany, not just in debt, but in the way out, even if that way out is illusory. I do think that in more ways than one, we're probably going to go kind of full right wing. I would imagine some sort of dictator followed by massive military expansion. It's not right. No, no, me saying this isn't me wanting it. It just seems like if you have any cursory understanding of history, that's probably where this is going. Like we're not just gonna hand everything over to China. Like that's not how this works. We have a massive military. And I'm not defending this morally or ethically. It just I don't really see I don't really see how this doesn't result in just an all out. I mean, there's got to be someone in the Pentagon just going like, why pay China? How about we just kill them all? Like there's nothing in the last 70 or 80 years gives me the feeling that we won't do that. It's not like, well, America has a long history of only ethically deploying the military. Korea, Vietnam, global war on terror, Ukraine. Like, no, it's kind of the hammer we use for everything and anything. And why wouldn't it take place again? It's happened so many, and this isn't. I'm not directing this at you more so, just speaking in general.
Mm,
Why wouldn't we? We have shown decade after decade that no matter what the problem is, we respond to it with the hammer of the DoD. Whatever it is, it's
yeah,
stub my toe, kill someone with the hammer. Somebody yells at you, kill them with a hammer. We've done it in every decade and on every continent. I guess I just look at this and I'm like, why wouldn't it happen again? It's bad. It's not, I'm 30, actually, as of yesterday, I'm 34. It's not good. I'm not the end of my life. Like I hope to have a long life ahead of me. And if a world war breaks out, I probably won't have a long life ahead of me. I imagine they'll move the draft age. I will absolutely get drafted and die in a trench in Taiwan. No part of me wants this to happen,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't, if you hooked me up to a lie detector, I don't think I could say with a straight face, yeah, we're not going to try to go to war with China. I think it's not if, it's when, which is very depressing. But I don't know. I don't think anyone really believes that one day we're going to go, all right, guys, we got to hand it all over to China. You know?
Well, the thing is, there are, from what I gathered, negotiations going on behind the scenes. I mean, China sees Taiwan as a province of China, so they think they have a moral and legal claim to
Yeah.
Taiwan. So let them work it out. Just as China took over Hong Kong in 1997 after the British left, Hong Kong is still, I guess, thriving economically. China is not stupid. The leadership is not stupid. They know they need world trade in order to feed and make their population uh, prosperous. Without trade, China becomes a backwater country because who's going to buy the stuff that's produced there? So they have to tread very lightly because they need the world to export their products. So, what to do with Taiwan and China is let them work it out because people in Taiwan are very industrious, they're very entrepreneurial, and China would benefit from a close relationship. I mean, China and Taiwan are trading as we speak. There are trade going on between the two countries, even though China doesn't consider Taiwan a country. But the point is, let them work it out. It's not our responsibility to work out disputes between nations. We can offer the State Department as a sort of a negotiating forum for that process, but we should not get involved directly, as we have in Ukraine with the armaments, and God knows how many advisors are there. We're not. I don't think we're told the truth about that, and how many advisors are in Israel helping the Israelis against the Hamas. So these are very difficult times because there are tripwires around the world that could suck us into a third world war. And that's why the Biden administration has been a total failure in preventing these things from happening. I mean, these things have happened under the Biden administration watch. So they've failed to use diplomacy to to help settle disputes among nations that we feel are important to world stability. And so let the State Department and other diplomats go to these places and say, let's sit down. And we know from evidence that the United States did not want to have peace between Ukraine and Russia, that Zelensky and Putin were ready to discuss things, and the United States intervened and prevented those peace negotiations from happening before Putin decided to go into Ukraine. So the United States has a lot of blood on its hands for what's happened in Ukraine. And with Hamas, Israel helped create Hamas as a counterpoint to the PLO. And look what's happened. So you got to be wary of these things. In addition, October 7th last year, how is it possible that the supposedly terrific Mossad and other intelligence agencies of Israel didn't know what was happening in Gaza and planning this invasion of Israel? So there's something very fishy about what
Hmm.
happened in terms of why Hamas was able to do what it did. And there's evidence that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, um, in the first few hours of the invasion, killed a lot of their own fellow citizens in response to the attack. So there's a lot of things we don't know. There are a lot of things that are coming out by good reporting from people writing on Substack. But the basic premise, Tommy, in all this, as Randolph Bourne wrote, war is the health of the state, and as General Smedley Butler wrote, war is a
Or a
racket.
racket.
The average person gets nothing from war. I walked through the cemeteries of Normandy when we were on vacation many years ago, and you look at the crosses and some Jewish stars there of people, of young men 18, 19, 20, 22 years old who never were able to fulfill to live a life. How many scientists, engineers, doctors, lawyers, teachers, artists, entertainers were lost because of World War II on both sides. On both sides. I mean, the Germans lost a lot of people. The Russians lost a lot of people. How many of those young men and women would have been great assets to the world
Hmm.
population? And that's the cost of war. It's not only the destruction, but what we lost in terms of human capital, if you
Mm.
will. All the companies that were not created, all the inventions that were not created, all the artistry that was not created. So war is the antithesis of human civilization, and unfortunately, there's a strain in human beings of a warlike of warmongering of warlike measures, and it's been going on for thousands of years. So, fortunately, we live in the United States, surrounded by two oceans and two friendly nations on the north and southern border, and so we're pretty much protected from the disasters that have taken place in Europe and Africa, South America, and Asia. But for us to get dragged into another conflict overseas directly, and there's a poll that came out recently that says that more than 50% of the American people do not want American troops in Israel to help
Hmm.
to fight that war. So after the experience of Vietnam, which is certainly in the minds of my generation, the baby boomers who were drafted into the Vietnam War, I was a college student at the time, and people saw what went on with the war on terror and the disaster in Iraq. Um, the American people do not want another war. What they want is they're content now to send military arms to Ukraine and Israel, but that could lead to us getting directly involved, especially if we have advisors on the ground, and which some indications are that we do. So right now, U.S. warships are heading toward Israel as Iran makes threats against Israel because of the assassination of one of the
Yeah.
Hamas negotiators. This is the other thing that's really scary is that he was part of the negotiating team that was going to try to settle the differences between Hamas and Israel, and the Israelis took him out. So
Hmm.
how does Hamas feel about entering into negotiations when your chief negotiator is blown up by the Israelis? So
Hmm.
that, that's not very good public relations or very moral thing to do if you want to have peace in your region.
Well, I think that's when you look at something like October 7th, there is an odd polarity that we try to hold in our heads. It's the Mossad is at once the preeminent intelligence agency on the planet. It supersedes the CIA and MI5. At the same time, they have no idea what's going on within literal eye shot of their border, which
Yeah,
you rationally would then say they did, and they allowed it to happen because there are military advantages and subsequent actions they can take that, bolsters the state, no different than the United States would do that. And, when I look at something like all of the sort of tinder boxes around the world. And at first we can look at it and go, well, that's what you get from a Biden administration. That's what you get from a lack of a strong force in the world. Nature abhors a vacuum. All these things are happening naturally. But then I go, well, let's extrapolate, something like October 7th to the United States, which is far larger. And let's extrapolate something like a fundamentalist terrorist attack to maybe a global world war with first world nations, a total paradigm, the First World War kind of got rid of monarchies. The Second World War really slaughtered national sovereignty aside from a few big players, resulting in the Cold War, East versus West. If we were looking at a potential restructuring of the planet, which are what world wars are, then not Vietnam, not Korea, not the Soviets in Afghanistan, but a world war really is the restructuring of a current paradigm. Well, then I don't think it's too absurd to think that something like a seemingly impotent Biden administration is probably a very good thing if you are in the Pentagon. I mean, how can you have such a massive military with space capabilities and advanced aircraft? How do you take that monster and then convince China to move on Taiwan? How do you convince David to take a pot shot at Goliath? I think the Biden administration would be a pretty, yeah, if I'm in the DoD, I might look at, might be 2020 and I go, why don't you put in a real weak noodle of an administration? Let things get a little hairy for a couple years and then wait for China or Russia to get bold enough to lash out on an American base, which we have all around the world. It's pretty hard to miss them.
Hmm.
And then we could go in and kick off World War III, and it might actually look like we're just defending ourselves. So,
Yeah.
just like I don't look at the IDF from Assad and go, "Oh, those idiots let October 7th happen." I go, "Oh, what's the chessboard? They let that happen." In the same way, I look at the United States and I go, "Is it really that Biden's an idiot and a lame duck, or is this very beneficial?" On a much, we think in, 4 year terms. In the DoD, when you're looking out 10, 20, 30, like DARPA looks ahead 30, 40 years. 4 years is nothing. They might go,
Hmm.
yeah, real weak president. And then, I don't know, bring in Trump as the hammer, get the whole right wing behind it and rah rah, and we'll go kill a billion Chinese. Like, and it's evil. And it's at the end of the day, it's what you said about the Normandy crosses. At the end of the day, it completely screws over you and me and everyone else like us. Everyone that could go start a business, or maybe not even, maybe they just have the basic, human dream of being a father and a husband. Like, you don't even
Hmm.
need to go be some Steve Jobs character.
Right.
The end of the day, it completely destroys people like you and me, and it destroys what will be civilians in China. I mean, global war on terror, we forget about the 1.5 million Iraqi and Afghani civilians. Vietnam, we know about 58,000 GIs. We don't really talk about the 5 million Indo-Chinese.
Hmm. Hmm.
The average human being is robbed of truly just the most basic experience of living on this earth.
Yeah.
Holidays, birthdays, falling in love, getting a puppy, seeing a sunset. And it really is at the absolute core, it's pure evil. And I unfortunately though, I don't I don't feel too confident that we're not just gonna instigate World War III and try to wipe out the debt and set up a new established order. I just
Well,
don't feel too confident in that. Sorry for
well,
that.
well, no, this is what people have been writing about and talking about is that where does this lead us if we are constantly in confrontation with Russia and China and Iran? I mean, Iran has a long history with the United States. We helped overthrow a government in 1953 with the British.
Yeah, the
And
Shaw.
then they took our hostages in 1979 when the Ayatollah came in. And we was the big supporters of the Shah, who was a brutal dictator. No one talks about this on TV. They don't talk about the American history, the American and Iranian history. So people should understand the Iranians have real concerns about the U.S. involvement in that part of the world since they've intervened and
Totally justifiable concerns.
yeah, I mean, this is why history is such an important subject and understanding who are the players and what are the facts and what are the policies and why peace and commerce is what George Washington and Thomas Jefferson talked about as being fundamental to the American Republic. If we don't have peace and commerce with the rest of the world, we're not going to have a society that is going to be free from conflict. And so they understood this very carefully because they were great students of history, and they understood human nature. that if you're in constant conflict, you really can't build an economy. And fortunately, we we well, fortunately, we've had a very strong economy for so many decades that we've been able to support a huge military. But I think those days are numbered because of the size of the debt, the national debt, the deficits, the interest expense. So the choice that we have to make is, do we want a welfare warfare state or do we want a free market limited government republic? That's the choice we have before us. It's statism versus liberty. That's the choice. There's no middle way. The middle the way has gotten us to where we are today. And that's why we need people to understand economics. We need to understand foreign policy, international relations, and work very hard for peaceful relations among nations, because that is going to improve people's economic well-being and give them, as you pointed out, the opportunity to enjoy the experiences that human beings have if they have a long life, whether it's 60, 70, 80, or 90 years or more. I mean, this is what the human beings should be are entitled to by their nature, is to have a long life to enjoy all the wonderful things that life has to offer. Instead, we're spending too much time on politics, too much money on politics, and those resources could be better used to build up local organizations and institutions, whether it's businesses or nonprofits that could help people for a whole host of things. And so that's the America that I thought when I was growing up America would be all about. But then the tensions in Cuba and then Vietnam, with a full-blown military involvement, has really changed America. That's why I think the Kennedy assassination was one of the most important events of my lifetime, because it ushered in the LBJ, who gave us the Great Society and the war in Vietnam, and possibly changed world history forever as well. Because I think Kennedy was dedicated to peace in the last year of his administration and wanted to expand that in 1964, but he was cut down because he wanted peace. And we know that there's substantial evidence that the people in Washington, the deep state, did not want peace. They wanted, at the height of the Cold War, they wanted to have continue the confrontation with the Soviet Union. So that's a part of history that many young people don't know about. And over time, as I learned the real history of what happened about the Kennedy assassination and then the RFK assassination in 1968 when he was
Hmm.
running for president, America has been involved in this endless desire to intervene overseas, and the American people have suffered because of it, not directly, but financially, I think psychologically as well. And of course, 9/11 happened, and that really changed America with the Patriot Act and the surveillance state. So, no good things have happened because of our involvement overseas. And as Ron Paul said in his presidential campaign in 2008, the terrorists are here because we're over there. And that's the reality of what happens when with blowback, is that
Hmm.
if you prod a bear, the bear is going to lash out at you. And so uh, intervention is probably the most destructive policy we could have, and that's why we need to move away from that. But I don't see that happening in anytime soon.
And with blowback is when that intervention in its very nature is classified, we don't see the obvious blowback. If
Mhm.
we knew, say there was no in a parallel universe, let's say there's no covert operations, and the president says, "Hey, we're sending in a team of Green Berets to this country, and we're gonna go kill this guy." And then, when shit would hit the fan, and eventually there'd be giant anti-American sentiment, we go, "Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, but what happens when it's all classified, and it's all classified for 50, 60 years? You don't see that. All you see is, man, Iranians just hate America. Why do they hate us so much? Russia they really just don't like us. But we don't see everything we're doing. So when the very interventions themselves are classified, the blowback, it's very easy for the whatever administration's in charge to go, oh my God, they just hate America. And
Hmm.
to the average person, we don't have access to those covert operations, and we're not read into those programs. Yeah, to the uneducated or the uninitiated eye, it does look like, man, the Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden just hates freedom and skyscrapers. And
Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not, sticking up for them. They're demons from hell. But like, you don't see, you don't, you just see somebody getting punched in the face. But what you don't see is everything they were doing beforehand to initiate getting
Hmm.
punched. And it's classified. And actually, if anyone tells you about it, they're going to go to jail.
Yeah.
So and then by the time we eventually figure it out, it's been 50 years. And it's like by the time we figure out about the Kennedy assassination or the Gulf of Tonkin, by then it's like the it's over.
Yeah.
It's over. We've been out of Vietnam for 50 years. It's over. Well, what are you talking about? And, you know, and in 2080, when we find out that, I don't know, we were sending in Delta Force teams to Ukraine and shooting Russian officials, by then you'd be like, yeah, that's the Ukraine war, though. That's been over for 60 years.
Mm.
And well, then you're on to the next thing. It's like right now we're at war with China. And it's like, and then by the time you start to kind of piece together these patterns, it's like the end of your life. You put it all together and you've been like, this is what's happening, and then people go, ah, you're just an old angry man. And I don't know. I don't know. Find God, I guess. I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for it. Um, but for now, Dr. Saber, I so we wrap this one up. We're coming up on an hour. Um, thank you so much for your time. You're a walking, talking encyclopedia. It never ceases to amaze me or put a smile on my face. I love having you on, man.
Thank you so much. Well, this is what happens when you get older.
You,
You have a lifetime of reading and really meeting some smart people over the years at conferences and just meeting people at various venues. And I'll be doing a new project soon. I'll let you know about it. It's called
sure.
Money Clips, and we'll be
Yeah, yeah,
having
yeah.
podcasts and courses, and there'll be a paywall. I've been invited to participate in this, and it's very exciting because we'll take some of these things and put it in a nice, coherent courses on a whole bunch of topics. And with podcasts, I'll tap into the network of people I've met over the years who are experts in a whole bunch of different fields, and we'll get the message out to the American people because right now I think we are uh, in at the crossroads. We're really at the crossroads of how we are going to maintain our freedoms, our liberties, our prosperity, if the government keeps on doing what it does, and we'll see what unfolds. I mean, we're in the silly season of politics and
Hmm.
the presidential election, and every president in my lifetime has been a disappointment, especially Republicans who say they're for limited government, but they haven't done anything in my lifetime to roll back the welfare warfare state, and that's why people call it a uniparty. We have a uniparty, and in '71, I said we have a Washington party when Nixon did wage price controls, and which is an anathema to free enterprise principles. So anyway, it's great to be with you, Tommy. Hopefully, we'll do it again soon.
Yes, sir.
And we've got a lot of things to go over the next time.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your time. Guys, go in the description. You can find the link to his Substack, all your books, all that good stuff. Dr. Sabrin, thank you so much for your time. And till next time, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Guys,
Tommy.
yes, sir. Thank you for watching, everybody.